I would also like to highlight that the foreign ministers unequivocally condemned terrorism in all forms and manifestations and recognized that all acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable. They called for strengthening of efforts to deny safe havens to terrorist groups, freedom of operations, movement and recruitment, as well as financial, material or political support. The G20 also reflected upon the threats arising from the misuse of new and emerging technologies and highlighted the importance of strengthening international cooperation in that regard. For the first time, the G20 foreign ministers considered and discussed the topic of counter-narcotics and called for inclusive and strong international cooperation in this regard. They also discussed the topic of global skills mapping, and this was in the context of the changing nature of work. They recognized that well-integrated, skilled workers benefit not only in their country of origin, but also the destination country where they may happen to be employed. The G20 also accepted the need to strengthen international cooperation in the field of humanitarian assistance and disaster risk reduction. This will be further discussed in the working group on this particular subject, which has been newly set up by the Indian Presidency. Now, as you all know, women-led development is one of the key priorities of the Indian Presidency, and it has been personally highlighted by the Prime Minister. After due deliberations on the G20 table, the foreign ministers affirmed the need to put gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, including their leadership, at the core of our efforts for inclusive recovery. Important discussions on global health were also held. The statement, the outcome document I'm talking about, highlights the need for strengthening key aspects of global health architecture, support for the pandemic fund, and continued political attention to global health. It stresses the need for implementing the One Health approach. The foreign ministers addressed climate action in the context of common but differentiated responsibilities and urged developed countries to fulfill their commitments to deliver on the goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion per year urgently and through to 2025 to tackle climate change. Now, despite the challenges of the divergent positions on the conflict in Ukraine, the G20 foreign ministers were able to come to a consensus on addressing these key challenges that I have just mentioned. As the Prime Minister urged, we did indeed focus more on what unites us than what divides us. You would also see that it has been our endeavor to ensure that the voice of the Global South is heard on the G20 table, and that is why India had organized the Voice of the Global South Summit in January this year, in which I think 125 countries participated. So the agenda for the foreign ministers meeting, as well as the outcome document, has very clearly taken forward the priorities of the Global South. We are also particularly glad that to see so many of our friends and partners from the Global South on the table, because India, as President, had invited them. I would also like to point out that today's sessions commenced with a moment of silence to pay respect to those who lost their lives in the recent earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Ahead of our deliberations in today's first session, as I told you, the Prime Minister gave his virtual address to the foreign ministers. I would like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to all G20 members, to all the participating delegations, obviously to our own team working on it, for the support which they have given to the priorities of the Presidency, for the efficient holding of today's meeting. We believe that the outcome document is truly a reflection of G20's commitment to face global challenges squarely and collectively. The G20 foreign ministers, along with the ministers from the guest countries and heads of delegations from international organizations, will be calling upon the Prime Minister very shortly, in fact, immediately after this press conference. So this really, in summary, is a sense of what was discussed today, what was negotiated amongst the G20 members, and the chair's summary and outcome document will, of course, be released in due course. So I think, Arindam, that should pave the way for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for a detailed and comprehensive perspective, sir. Some ground rules before I open the floor for questions. Please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. Please note, we will try to limit questions to one per organization outlet. We will also be grouping questions. And finally, we have a very hard cut on time, as Honorable Minister mentioned. He has to go somewhere, so please don't be disappointed. Let me start with a few hands here. 1 second. I saw the hand up there first. Sudhi, why don't you start?
Sir, Shruti Ranjan from Bloomberg. So if you could give us an understanding as to why the foreign ministers could not come to a consensus. We know India was trying very hard to convince everybody, in fact China and Russia, to kind of agree on this. Where did the hurdle come up? If you could give us an understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Ma'am, here on the right.
Thank you. Barbara Platt-Usher from the BBC. The Russians issued a statement after a meeting between China and Russia on the sidelines of the event, in which they criticized the West for employing blackmail and threats and interfering in the internal affairs of other countries. And I was wondering whether that had any impact on your efforts to come to a joint communique, or I know you've highlighted that you were able to deal with the issues you wanted to find consensus on, but to what degree did that affect the discussions? And to just clarify that a chair summary is not a joint communique, and whether you felt that you fell short of your expectations in terms of what you might have been able to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Right here. Yes.
Sir, Rishikesh from PTI. My question is the Russia-Ukraine conflict potentially derailing aspirations of global South under India's presidency, sir? And especially India's concerns about Indo-Pacific region, Chinese aggression
Sorry,
in the Indo-Pacific region.
Could you clarify your question? Sorry.
My question is
You
that
got it. Okay, fair enough. Siddhant, go ahead.
So Siddhant from WION. Sir, do you think that Siddhant from WION, my question is, do you think the Russia-Ukraine conflict is potentially paralyzing the grouping because of the divide between Russia and the West? And my second question, what was your meeting with the Chinese foreign minister?
The first question has already been asked. I'll take that as second one. So, after you.
Okay. In a sense, the first three questions cover a very similar area, so I'm really clubbing it together. I'll ignore your first question because you're allowed only one, so I'll take the China question. The picture which I was sharing with you was the G20 delegations, the members, the negotiators, the ministers. We met, we discussed, the officials also obviously negotiated. Now, there were a very large number of issues on which there was agreement. And in fact, if you look at the detailed picture that I have presented to you, there was agreement on various aspects of strengthening multilateralism, on promoting food and energy security, on climate change, climate action, ensuring biodiversity, on gender issues, on global health, on counter-terrorism, on new emerging technologies, counter-narcotics, how do we go about with development cooperation. So there are, I would say, I don't want to put a percentage on it because that's not a fair way of depicting, a collection of issues. But do appreciate that on the bulk of the issues which concern especially the global South, the developing countries, there was a considerable meeting of minds. and a considerable meeting of minds which has been captured by the outcome document. Now, the question, why was, did we fall short of expectations? Why is it called what it is? If we had had a perfect meeting of minds on all issues and captured it fully, then obviously it would have been a collective statement. But there were issues, and I think the issues, I would say, very frankly, concerned the Ukraine conflict, on which there were divergences. So on the bulk of the issues, we were able to get an outcome document. There was a chair summary because there were differences on the Ukraine issue which we could not reconcile between various parties who held differing positions. Now, is the conflict impacting the global south? Of course it is. I mean, it's not something new. In fact, India has been saying this very strongly for pretty much close to a year, that this is affecting. In fact, today in my own session, I actually used the word saying, for much of the global south, this is a make or break issue. That the costs of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of fertilizer, the availability of fertilizer, which means next year's food, these are all extremely pressing issues. And if you see some of the countries who were already struggling with debt, who were already impacted by the pandemic, for them, this conflict, the knock-on effects of this conflict coming on top of that, has been really, damaging is a very, very mild word. So it is a matter of very, very deep concern for us, which is why we have kept the focus in this meeting very much on the concerns of the global south. We feel these are the most vulnerable countries. It's not realistic, it's not credible to talk about the future of the global economy and the multilateral order if we are not able to really address and focus on the issues of those who are most in need. So that's been broadly the approach. So just to sum up, I would say in terms of the outcome document, which we will be putting out very, very shortly, you will see that, the bulk, there is, almost, I would say, 95% in terms of paragraph agreement. And it is just on 2 paragraphs that we were not able to get everybody on the same page or same para, as you might call it. On the China meeting, I met Minister Chingang on the sidelines of the conference this afternoon. It's our first meeting after he took over as foreign minister. So we spent, I don't know, maybe about 45 minutes talking to each other. And the bulk of our conversation, understandably, was about the current state of our relationship, which many of you have heard me describe as abnormal. And I think those were among the adjectives that I used in that meeting. We have, there are real problems in that relationship that need to be looked at, that need to be discussed very openly and candidly between us. That's what we sought to do today. We also had a brief discussion on what was happening in the G20 framework, but the thrust of the meeting was really on our bilateral relationship and the challenges in the bilateral relationship, especially that of peace and tranquility in the border areas.
Sorry, let me take another round of questions, if you have some. Okay. There, yes, please. No, there, please.
Dr. Jaishankar, Mujib Mashal from the New York Times. Although this
भारत की कोशिश से वो हो सका था कि बाली डिक्लेरेशन जारी हो सका। अब आने वाले महीनों में क्या कोशिश होगी कि समिट में एक ज्वाइंट डिक्लेरेशन आ सके, सभी लोगों के बीच यूक्रेन मसले पर सहमति बन सके?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Look, I wouldn't put it the way you put it, that the statement fell short. I mean, there are in diplomacy occasions when you are able to get 20 countries to agree on everything. There are occasions when you don't. So, for me, the primary objective of this meeting and of our presidency was really to highlight what were the key problems facing the global economy, especially the problems faced by the more vulnerable economies of the world. Now, if you, as I said, and when you look at the outcome document, you will see this for yourself. The bulk of the issues which are concerning developing countries, I think they were very satisfactorily addressed. I mean, it's not like we can give instantaneous solutions, but I think the thinking, the policy prescriptions, the commitments, the mindset were all absolutely on the right direction. So, yes, on one particular issue, because of very polarized views of some countries, we were not able to bridge it on this particular occasion. Whereas, as our colleague pointed out from there, we were able to do that with, a number of us were able to do that collectively in Bali. But obviously, the Bali situation today, for whatever reason, some countries feel cannot be extrapolated. So I would urge you really to look on the fact that substantively on the key development issues of debt, issues of finance, issues of food, issues of fuel, issues of health, issues of climate. In fact, this meeting was able to get everybody around the table. And as I said, this is no easy task given the state of polarization in the world. On your question about global skills mapping, essentially today there is a growing demand in the developed world for skills and talents. There is a growing availability, but they are not necessarily in the developed world. Much of that availability is in the developing world. So how do you match the demand and supply for the benefit of the global economy? That is the really crucial issue. For a country like India, which has significant human resources, and which fortunately now has a government which pays attention to the development of those human resources, which actually focuses on skills and talent and innovation and education. This is an opportunity for us. So, especially in the last 9 years, we have also been looking at what are called mobility and migration partnership, which allow for legal mobility, which ensure that talent and skills which go out get the same treatment in those particular geographies as their own citizens, and which ensure that all of this is legal and free of any sort of illegal activities. Now, it's not just India. I'm citing India because we are among the countries where, very active in this. But there are other countries as well. So this is widely recognized. In fact, in today's intervention, I'm not, I think the etiquette is that you don't specifically say what, individual ministers said. But I can tell you that some of the relevant international organizations and some of the other ministers there spoke at some length about the importance of how do you ensure, smooth mobility, how do you ensure protected mobility, legal mobility, because this is today one of the big issues before the international economy. On the Taiwan Straits issue, I think the answer is very simple. No, the matter was not discussed today. जो आपका जो सवाल है कि बाली में हम लोग जो हैं उस समय माने हमारे कारण ही नहीं, हम सब मिलके हमारा योगदान तो था ज़रूर उसमें, कि हम लोग उस समय वहाँ सहमति बना पाए। अब क्या हुआ है कि बाली के बाद अभी जो है दुनिया में काफ़ी कुछ घटनाएं हुई हैं। अब जो G20 के सदस्य जो हैं, जो इस मुद्दे के साथ जो जुड़े हुए हैं, उनके इस मामले में अलग अलग विचार हैं। और हम जो हैं इस बार उनके विचार माने उनके बीच में इतना गैप था कि हम लोगों ने प्रयास तो की, पर प्रयास के बावजूद हम जो हैं इस समय सहमति बना नहीं पाए। तो आप देखेंगे कि जैसे हमने बेंगलोर में किया था वैसे ही जो बाली में जो तय हुआ है उसी को हमने दोहराया है। और हमारी जो सोच है कि G20 के ज़्यादा सदस्य जो हैं वो अभी भी बाली के जो आउटकम जो था उसके साथ वो जुड़े हुए हैं। सो एसेंशियली ही आस्क्ड मी सेइंग he asked me saying that why were you not able to carry forward what happened in Bali, and I explained that given the state of polarization, given presumably developments which have happened since then, we found that positions were very far apart, and we tried very hard. We were not the only country who tried. The G20 works very, very collectively, but we were not able to bridge the gap. But I want to conclude by highlighting one very important point. In the past, for quite a few years now, G20 foreign ministers have met. This is the first time that the G20 foreign ministers have produced an outcome document. The outcome document, I think, reflects consensus and cooperation and collaboration on a very vast number of issues that are particularly important today for the international community, for the global south. So very frankly, I think it's a good day's work that we have done, and I'm very happy to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you also, Foreign Secretary, sir, and Su Sherpa Abhay. Thank you all for joining us today. Good evening.
That was External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar briefing the media after the two sessions concluded of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. The big news point coming through the fore is that bulk of the issues were addressed and consensus was built, but there was one sticking point, that was Ukraine, which is why there is going to be no joint communication from the finance ministers of these countries. What we are going to be seeing in a short while from now is a statement by the chair and documents which go on to point to the discussions that took place during each of those two sessions. But Ukraine still remains an issue between the G20 countries. This also comes at a time when the Russian foreign minister is come out and lashed out at the West for propping up Ukraine and stalling negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Bilaterals have been on the agenda as well. It's not just the G20 summit. There were bilaterals that were held by S. Jaishankar with his counterparts from the United States and from China just a short while ago. S. Jaishankar held talks with US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, focusing on bilateral ties and pressing global issues, including the Ukraine conflict. Meanwhile, we do know that during the bilateral with China, there was also the issue of border security concerns in border areas that came up. Remember, we had seen a softening of stand from the Chinese side before they landed here for the G20 FM's meeting. We value our ties, and our ties are extremely crucial to Beijing, is what the message was. Is that going to be signaling a climb down from China? Well, we'll get more details of what exactly transpired in that one-on-one meeting between S. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart. But at the G20, it is India's moment to shine. India is leading the way. India is the bridge between the global south and the west. That's the message that the Prime Minister this morning also sent in as he inaugurated this key meeting. Listen in.
I welcome you to India for the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. India has selected the theme of One Earth, One Family, one future for its G20 presidency. It signals the need for unity of purpose and unity of action. I hope that your meeting today will reflect the spirit of coming together for achieving common and concrete objectives.
We had two sessions really of meetings, and the topics range from strengthening multilateralism, ensuring food and energy security, development cooperation, and the second session was on counterterrorism, global skill mapping, humanitarian assistance and disaster response, as well as women-led development. Now the G20 ministers, after the discussions today and the negotiations which preceded it, we have agreed to issue a common position where the G20 as a group has come together and arrived at a consensus on many important issues.
Abhishek, my colleague, reporting live from the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan, where the External Affairs Minister was just addressing the media. Now, what's important is that several bulk of the issues were addressed, but Ukraine still remains a sticking point, Abhishek, and that is something that, unfortunately, we could not build consensus on.
Clearly, while the External Affairs Minister was addressing media, he was very frank and candid about the wide divide that has become more prominent in the last 4 or 5 months ever since the Bali Declaration, where sort of a consensus was agreed upon and a joint declaration came out. But since then, there has been presumably a lot of international affairs that has not let that divide bridge, and it has only drifted apart, and that has been the major reason why there could not be any joint declaration. However, the chair's statement will be there, and an outcome document is something that India is going to release very soon. This is something of the very similar kind that has happened in Bangalore, where those paragraphs where the dissent were very much between the two sides. One was Russian and Chinese side, the other was USA and European side, was also mentioned with the caveat that these are the disagreement points. So that is something of that nature is going to happen this time also. While India did try to bring the differing side on a very consensus way on various issues, but the Ukraine is a very tipping point where both sides have now very much are very much rigid on their stance, and they are not moving in a direction where it could be brought together in a consensual way.
Right. Well, what S. Jaishankar also came out and confirmed, Abhishek, is that there is going to be, instead of the joint communique, instead of the joint statement, there is going to be a statement of the chair that we are expecting to be put out in public domain. When can we expect details of that to come out?
That will happen very soon, like in few hours time we'll be able to have understanding of actually what transpired during the discussion about these 29 ministers, like 19 countries, one European Union, and then there were other invited countries and guest countries whom India had invited under its own chairmanship. What transpired, what discussion took place, what were the, apart from Ukraine, which is much talked, and we know what exactly is going on in Ukraine outside the G20 ambit also, and inside G20, what are the differing perception on the same issue. But apart from that, there are other issues of global financial architecture, how to strengthen that, the food crisis, fuel crisis, fertilizer crisis. We know that there has been for 1 year or at least now, fertilizer has been scarce in the global market, and now it is going to have a cascading effect when the farmers across the world, especially in the global south, will not be able to have their farm produce as at a very good rate. So the productivity will be reduced, and the food crisis that is already impacting economies around the world, and especially in the global south, they will have even tougher days ahead. So these are the issues where much of the broader consensus was very much there. This is what as Jaishankar was referring to as bulk issues. Like apart from Ukraine, the issues that concerns world were mostly agreed upon, and this is why this joint declaration would not be coming. But of course, the chair statement and the outcome document will be coming from this G20 meeting.
Yes, do keep an eye out on that. Siddhant, my colleague, also joining us live. And Siddhant, the G20 may have not been able to build consensus as far as Ukraine goes, but there were bilaterals with the United States and with China as well. Territorial integrity is something that definitely came up as far as Jaishankar's meeting with his Chinese counterpart is concerned.
Well, that's right, and in fact, Mr. Jaishankar has told this in a press briefing that how the efforts were made to build consensus, and in fact, he himself took more than 40 bilaterals to convince these countries, and in fact, he also referred to the Prime Minister's message this morning, in which Prime Ministers made these foreign ministers from various countries realize that we are sitting here in Delhi doing this meeting for those who are not a part of these meetings. In fact, Mr. Jaishankar also gave emphasis to the debt, to the devastation that has happened after post-COVID, and also he said that this is the bad situation because for what is a roadmap for food and energy.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you there, Siddhant. I'll
years.
come back to you, but Foreign Affairs analyst Ravinder Sachdev joining us on this broadcast. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. How do you look at the fact that despite efforts being made by India, unfortunately there was no consensus as far as Ukraine goes? Do you think that this is going to cast a shadow on the summit that we see of the G20 heads of state later this year?
I look at it two ways. One, yeah, it will have an impact on the G20, leaders summit in September. But on the other hand, I think given the reality and the realpolitik of the world, we should not be much under pressure that we have to generate a consensus joint communique. And if we are not able to do it, then it's a failure of our leadership. I think the world recognizes the complications are so complex, right? That it will take a sea change, a tectonic change of sorts before the world starts coming to a joint statement of things. So that's one thing I would say that, yes, we've tried and we will try, we will keep on trying. And especially in the morning session, as you were saying and your colleague, what Prime Minister Modi and India are pushing for is that G20 is not only a forum for these 20 to discuss the world between them. It is a forum, virtually I think is transforming into a forum like a UN. UN is in absentia, right? So the G20 is a forum of the 20 economies who have to look and think of issues which affect those who are not in the room. Because all of this is interconnected. So I think there is a, sea change happening and it will take time. So joint communiques, we can come out, we may not be able to come out. I would think I will not lay much to it because you see, it's not mere words, which a nation would say. There's raw interests of every nation now. And every nation is very clear about what their real bottom line interests are. There can be no amount of smooth talking or wordsmithery that can create a joint statement because everybody understands, what is at stake. So I think India would not, because the finance ministers meet also ended with no thing, only a chairman summary. So you're right. I think by the time we reach September, it will cast some shadow, but who knows, some other, maybe some kind of joint communique could emerge in September. I'm not saying that may not. But these are the pieces, complications which are leading to it.
Right, and as far as the bilaterals that took place on the sidelines, Ravinder Sachdev, the one with China especially is the one that's been keenly watched because we've time and again had External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar come out and say that ties between India and China are not normal. And until we come to the negotiating table, until we both, and China especially, decide to stay on their side of the border and decide to maintain status quo, until that negotiation happens, relationship can't be normal. So what exactly transpired between these two leaders in that closed-door meeting, that's going to be extremely keenly watched.
Oh, yeah. My estimate would be the conversation could go on two tracks. One track, it could go, India could say to China, live and let live. You do not trouble us, we do not trouble you. Let's solve the boundary situation. The discussion goes on that track, one. Or the discussion goes on the other track, wherein we say move back from, X point, Y point on the boundary, so many military level talks, and China says, oh, you don't ban our Chinese apps. It gets into you and me, arguments and counter arguments. To some extent, my estimate would be that the discussion would have been on the second track, wherein, we are laying out what we think they are doing wrong and they're laying out what they think we are doing wrong. Because there is no intent, it seems, from China on the first track, which I'm referring to, the first track being that China and India, we agree to live and let live, keep the status quo, and look at solving the border issue. There is no such, I think, intent from the Chinese side on that. And if there's no intent by the Chinese side on that, and then I think India will not pick up that. Because you see, if we talk of peace and settlement, then it's in a negotiation, it seems you're coming from a weaker position that we are the more needy ones. So India will not put that up unless China gives an indication, but China has given no indication. So that track, which would be the real need for India and China relations long term, would not have been discussed. My sense would be it would be the second, track or the trajectory, wherein we would have laid out our concern. Prime Minister Jaishankar would have said exactly as you said that, unless the border issue is solved, we cannot look at life as normal. China would say that, yeah, life can be normal. Let's look, but why are you banning our apps? Why are you taking action against our companies, etc., etc.
Right. So whether or not we see a statement coming to the fore from the Chinese side about what exactly transpired or not, we'll keep an eye out on that. But Rabinder Sachdev, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. My colleagues Siddhant and Abhishek also continue to get us the very latest from on ground there. The meeting has concluded, Abhishek. We are expecting the statement of the chair. Siddhant is also with me. And Siddhant, we are expecting that statement, even though it's not going to be a joint communique. We are expecting a statement from the chair, which perhaps is not the tradition. But that's what we are going to get in just a short while from now. And it's going to be a busy evening because we are going to be seeing news conferences by several other world leaders, including Antony Blinken, in a short while.
Well, that's right. Look, India has given efforts to build consensus. And in fact, EAM took multiple bilaterals to convince foreign ministers personally, but that did not work. But look, the idea of India was to give emphasis to the main items on the list other than the Russia-Ukraine war. And in fact, while addressing a press conference also, EAM Jaishankar highlighted those items, that how progress has been made on those agendas, which includes global talent mapping, which also includes food and energy security, which also includes multilateralism. But again, you're absolutely right. There's not going to be any communique or joint statement. There's going to be chair's summary outcome. Why? Because again, Russia and perhaps some countries have shown reservations for some of the paragraphs mentioned in the Bali declaration. But again, EAM Jaishankar made it very clear that that last time around the consensus were built in Bali. This time around, the word geopolitics has changed, and a few countries has extrapolated what they were convinced with last time around in Indonesia. Attempts were made to convince them. In fact, the Prime Minister made appeal this morning to the foreign ministers of these countries that we are here, we are doing this meeting not for the people in the room, but the people, those who are outside the room. And in fact, the larger message of unity was also given by the Prime Minister. Even India has given emphasis on people, even the Global South. If we talk about Global South, then how Global South is affected because of Russia-Ukraine conflict. Then also the developments in the geopolitics. Many of these nations are not doing economically well, and then a lot of people are affected because of COVID. Then there is a problem problem of food supply. So all those issues were addressed today, and in fact, India is quite convinced. India is quite satisfied with the way the consensus have been built on the other agendas.
Yes, and bulk of issues were addressed is what the confirmation came to the fore from S. Jaishankar as well. Siddhant, do stay on with me because we have more information that's now trickling in, and the big breaking news that we are getting at this point in time is that a confirmation has come to the fore from the MEA that the Quad Summit is going to take place tomorrow. Remember, it's a meeting of the foreign ministers of India, Australia, Japan and United States. Up until now, we did not have any confirmation whether or not this Quad meeting is going to take place on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. But now a confirmation has come to the fore, and Siddhant getting us the details from the MEA. Yes, Siddhant.
Well, that's right. So, Quad meeting of foreign ministers was on the cards, and in fact, yesterday, the first mentioning of Quad meeting could be seen in Antony Blinken's schedule, but there was no confirmation, independent confirmation from the government of India. This time around, we are getting this confirmation that tomorrow there's going to be Quad meeting in New Delhi, and we have also been told that Japanese foreign minister who couldn't come for today's G20 meeting because of the domestic compulsion, because the parliament did not give him approval, as they have some kind of setup where the parliamentarians have to attend budget session. So because of which the foreign minister couldn't come to attend the G20 meeting today. So his deputy was dispatched by Japan, but we have been told by late night or early morning tomorrow, the foreign minister of Japan is going to arrive for the Quad meeting. And in fact, all these four nations foreign ministers are going to sit at around 8:30 in the morning, and they are going to discuss multiple issues in terms of security as far as Indo-Pacific region is concerned. Last time around they met in the month of September in 2022. So this is perhaps for the second time in 1 year the foreign ministers are going to meet, and it is also going to be significant because it is happening on the sidelines of G20 event taking place in India. At the same time, this entire Quad, the Quad grouping is also very important because it is new, it is newly formed, and also it reflects and it is also to send out a message to the other countries that how these four countries are growing together. So yes, tomorrow's Quad meeting is going to be very important, and the confirmation is coming from Government of India now. Back to you.
Right, that confirmation has now come to the fore, and like Siddhant, my colleague, was also pointing out, it was not too long ago, it was less than 6 months ago in September in 2022 when the last Quad meeting took place. Now, Siddhant, we had External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar meet his Chinese counterpart as well. And as far as the Quad goes, countering China as far as the Indo-Pacific goes, that's also something that has been high on agenda. So perhaps we could look at that coming up in the tomorrow's meeting as well.
Well, absolutely, and in fact, today also India made its stand very clear. If you go through the tweets that have been made from the handle of External Affairs Minister, you will see that in most of the meetings he has expressed his happiness meeting his counterparts, or has written that the bilateral issues are discussed. But when it was about posting picture with his Chinese counterpart, then very clearly it was written that the border issue was discussed and several other bilateral issues were also discussed. So that is in a way a messaging which has been done by External Affairs Minister for his Chinese counterpart, that border issue is still on priority for India. Reason being because Chinese media has been reporting that it is an opportunity for India to bridge the gap between the two blocs. Chinese media has also been reporting that China is keen in keeping good bilateral relations with India, given the fact that India doesn't bring geopolitical conflict in between. So that was a statement which came from Chinese media. So to counter that, it was very clearly said by External Affairs Minister in his briefing also, and in fact in the tweet that that has been made by his office today, that border issues were discussed. So
yes, so that is something that could come up in the Quad meeting tomorrow as well. Do stay on with me, Siddhant. Prasoon Sharma, Foreign Affairs expert, also joining us on this broadcast. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18, Mr. Sharma. How do you look at what's transpired in the foreign ministers' meeting today? The fact that a consensus could not be built, which is why moving away from tradition, perhaps we're not going to have a joint statement. Do you think that is something that is going to shadow the rest of India's G20 presidency?
I don't think so. As our foreign minister mentioned, that there were many points where there was a consensus. And many countries, even having this depolarization, they accepted major points which India raised. So I think it's a commendable job from Indian side. And if you see the kind of support India is getting from both the polar sides, whether it's western part or Russia, it's commendable as well. And I think the backdoor meetings and diplomacy India is facilitating to, get some consensus to stop this war and other critical points. So I think India's G20 will be historic, and there will be some major diplomatic wins for India as well as for the global community.
Yes, and the fact of the matter is that all three countries that do not see eye to eye were on the negotiating table. Ukraine did come up. There may have been some heated words that were exchanged, but the fact is that India is still managing to be that bridge between the global south and the west. Mr. Sharma, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Reactions are trickling in. Like the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar also pointed out, this perhaps is the largest congregation of foreign ministers of the world. Let's listen in to what some of his counterparts who were here for the meeting had to say.
Going to echo the wise words of Prime Minister Modi, who was right when he said to Putin, and it has been quoted already, but worth quoting again, I know that today's era is not the era of war. And Vladimir Putin must listen to those words and heed those words, but sadly, he is not doing so yet.
There is no alternative for Ukraine than success on the battlefield. Only if Ukraine is successful on the battlefield, it will be able to be successful at a negotiation table. And there is much more than just Ukrainian sovereignty at stake here. There's universal values at stake. There's European safety and security at stake. And in the end, this war is also a litmus test for European and Dutch and global credibility.
G20 foreign ministers meeting is over, but there's lots that is going to happen in the next few hours. There are a slew of news briefings that are going to take place. There's also the Raisina dialogue, which the Prime Minister is going to be inaugurating. We'll keep an eye out on all of that for you here on CNN News 18. Before now, a quick break.
Yogi Adityanath says this is a message, an unambiguous, unequivocal one to the mafias, jinko mitti mein mila denge, whereas the opposition led by Akhilesh Yadav saying that this is simply extrajudicial killing.
When you say that this was a fixed match, the police didn't do and what it needed to do, obviously your allegation is that the present day government didn't do what it needed to do. But why do you believe that there is a fixed match? Why would the government let somebody like Amritpal run riot?
Russia is in a conflict. We are buying oil because it makes sense. But we are also telling Ukraine that we are with you. We'll help you. We're sending them aid. America is doing the same. It's upgrading the F-16s for the Pakistanis while calling India as a global strategic ally. So everybody knows how to play this game. So is India going to keep the focus on trade and economics?
Is the BJP fairly confident? I have covered the party and I know that they do not leave anything to chance, and 11 months is a long enough time for politics to change.